Good morning. Gonna begin a new topic, kind of a prelude, if you will, into an ecology course that some of you might decide to take here at Barton. The topic of coevolution sparks a lot of interest because it really involves a multidisciplinary approach due to the fact that plants and animals, or different kinds of plants, different kinds of animals, can interact, and they do interact with one another. And coevolution kind of tries to examine how one species is able to change the genetic composition of another and vice versa. So the second bullet in bold, reciprocal evolutionary change, is another definition of coevolution. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult to understand than the first bullet. The change in the genetic composition of one organism in response to its interactions with another. As you will see in the next chart, the interactions between species can either be positive, negative, or neutral. And we'll look at different types of interactions and their names in the next slide. This term was only introduced no more than about 56 years ago by a animal and population biologist, if you will, and a botanist, Paul Ehrlich and Peter Raven, both introduced this term coevolution from some work that they did with butterfly and plant interactions. Okay, so let's talk about some different types of species interactions. So on the top, you have the type of interaction being either beneficial, neutral, or negative. On this column, going down, you have the same, beneficial, neutral, or negative. So we're going to talk about these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 types of species interactions, and we're going to add one more just because I'm in a giving mood today. An overused word, and a word that's not really used. Actually, it's been overused in the past. It's not commonly used today. You will see it in some videos like you might see on Nature on the public television, or you might see the word symbiosis used on the Discovery Channel or Animal Planet. So symbiosis has been used much in the past to define any type of long-term, very close-knit interaction between two or more different species. Or in some cases, think of endosymbiosis, an interaction long-term between an organelle, like a mitochondrion or chloroplast, that lives inside of and provides function for a host eukaryotic cell. So think of endosymbiosis as a long-term interaction between a bacterium and a host cell. This word symbiosis has become fairly broad meaning to mean any kind of interaction between different species. So we tend to not use it, and I'm not really going to use it anymore in this particular chapter. Instead, I'm going to use the specific types of interactions and use those terms, such as competition. And really, competition is going to be most of the remaining slides. So if you look at the inside the parentheses, you see that competition is considered to be the most harmful species interaction, that it tends to be negative for both participants. Darwin defined competition as a struggle for existence, that species either of the same or different kind would struggle for the resources that they need to survive and then reproduce. If competition occurs between the same species within, if you will, that's referred to as intra, I-N-T-R-A, intra-specific competition. Think two male cardinals that I've got singing at home right now. They are competing with one another for territory. Maybe they compete for food, but in particular, they're competing for a breeding female at this time of year. So contrast that with inter, I-N-T-E-R, specific competition, when two different species compete. Maybe that male cardinal is competing for a good breeding territory with a northern mockingbird. So maybe two different species of birds are competing for breeding territories at the present time. You know, a space where they can build a nest or help a female build a nest and then raise young. So, the niche or niche comes in as very important when we discuss competition. Because of the harmful nature of competition, species in some form or fashion tend to have different adaptations to reduce competition, either between themselves, if they are the same, or if they are different species. A niche can be changed, if you will. A niche can be modified, and different species have different niches or niches as a means of reducing competition. And that would be interspecific competition. Trying to reduce competition between the same species, well, setting up different breeding territories, setting up a pecking order, or setting up a social hierarchy, a different mating hierarchy, if you will. There are ways to reduce a competition that is intra-specific as well. But having a different niche or a different role is a way to reduce competition between different species. These two bighorn sheep are butting heads. One will be a winner, one will be a loser, so to speak, when competing for a breeding female, or a harem, if you will, of females. So in most cases, neither male is damaged, and they both typically survive from this type of competition, but one does tend to win, and in that regard, often has a harem of females to mate with. So in this particular case, this headbutting event is a competition for the right to breed with a certain number of females. This particular competition between the lioness and the hyena is a competition for the food resource of the dead deer-like animal there. I'm not sure which kind it is. So does the female lioness protect that kill? And maybe there are some other members of the pack there that would feed as well, or does she walk away from the hyena? A pack of hyenas could potentially kill a much larger carnivore such as that lion. I talked about with inter-specific competition the importance of the niche. When two different species occur in the same area and they are competing for resources with one another, a realized niche or niche will often occur. In the absence of competition with a different species, a fundamental niche can occur. This data is on barnacles, and in the absence of competition, the smaller Coevolution barnacle can occur either at the low tide line or down here in the subtidal area. The larger barnacle, Semibalanus, can only occur in the subtidal area that's always covered with water. When the two barnacle species compete, Semibalanus is the, so to speak, winner, and it is able to form a monoculture, if you will, in the subtidal area that's always covered with water, whereas Coevolution tends to not overlap and tends to occur in the area that is only covered by water twice per day, at high tide, if you will. So the Semibalanus is thus bigger because it can feed, it can open up and filter the water all day long, whereas Coevolution is limited to feed only during high tide. At low tide, it would be exposed to the air, the heat, temperature, and so forth, and could not feed. It would have to close up its shell and try to survive when being out of water. So Semibalanus occupies the better habitat and is a better competitor for that habitat than is the smaller Coevolution. But in the absence of Semibalanus, Coevolution can actually occupy that subtidal habitat. So that was kind of the end for competition, with a kind of a little extended talk about the fundamental compared to the realized niche or niche. So the last slide in this first of two videos talks about an amensalism, and it was not included in slide 3, I believe it was, on the different types of species interactions. And amensalism is an interaction between two species when one is harmed and the other does not experience any effect, positive or negative. That's the zero. It's very hard to kind of define examples of this type of species interaction, but one that is assumed to be an amensalistic interaction is allelopathy. Allelopathy typically occurs in plants. A good example that I can give you is the tree that's called black walnut. Black walnut produces a chemical, it's called juglone, Juglone. This chemical has been implicated in deterring and inhibiting the growth of other plants around the black walnut tree. So allelopathy involves one organism producing some sort of chemical, some sort of a molecule that will inhibit the growth and reproduction of another. The best examples that I have seen of allelopathy, and it's really hard to show a causation. Correlation does not equal causation. So allelopathy is very hard to get data that actually shows a causation, that the chemical being produced by one plant actually causes the lack of or the decrease in growth and survival of another. I hope that makes sense in that regard. So that is the last of the species interactions in video 1. In video 2, we're going to pick up with some of the other types of interactions and end up talking about some of the different kinds of coloration that develops in organisms in response to their interactions with predators and other different species. So y'all take care. God bless. Goodbye.